Now. Thank you guys so much for being here. All right, welcome to our last inclusive learning circle series of the school year, fostering synergy between UDL, AT, and AAC. And today our topic is the UDL principle, action and expression. If you follow our QR code or our tiny URL, it's going to take you to the rolling home base document where you will find the slide decks for every ILC we've done so far this school year. You can find all of our recorded webinars there, recorded series of the ILC, and you'll find all the resources for today and all of the previous sessions as well. So as we're getting started here, feel free to introduce yourself into the chat, your role, your location, anything exciting happening in May that you want to share with us. Please help yourself. And yeah, we're so glad you're here today. So my name is Emily Desjardins. I'm one of the UDL AT content leads on the Open Access project. And with me, I'm so excited. We have two teachers from Olympus Junior High, which is our newest Open Access UDL showcase site. They will be opening up their doors in the fall for visits, and we're so excited for them to be here. Anne Grant is a middle school English teacher. Callie Kramer is a middle school math teacher. They both are filled with so much amazing knowledge within education. They are incredible UDL practitioners. We are so excited to have them here to share all of their wonderful wisdom with us. So thank you guys for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know many of you have been to our webinar series, and so you probably have heard this several times, but it's okay. Do a quick little intro for anyone who hasn't heard of us. If you are new to ILCs, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you being here. Open Access is one of the special education resource leads within the California statewide system of support. We provide professional learning across the state of California in the areas of UDL, accessible technology, assistive technology, and augmentative and alternative communication. You can find more information about our project linked on this flyer here. I'm not going to go in much more detail, but if you do have questions, our contact information is on the home base document, and we're happy to answer any questions at all. For today, our resources are going to be, we do have our website with all sorts of resources that you can access. Feel free to peruse. And again, if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to any of us on the project. And then also we have our home base linked here, QR code and tiny URL. And again, that's going to take you to the resources for the day and our rolling slide deck. We have an accessibility promise as part of our project that we really do try to make things as absolutely accessible as possible. We try to model the principles of UDL in action. And for accessibility, our strategies today are really those simple backgrounds with high contrast text, making sure when we're in person, we provide digital and print materials. So feel free to print any of those things on that home base if you'd like. You can access our slide deck using those the tiny URL and the QR code. And then we make sure we have our alt text for images. And we do our best to share as many multiple examples and non-examples and try to make things as collaborative as possible. For our session today, we're really going to be diving into that UDL principle of action and expression and thinking about what does it mean to provide multiple means of action and expression. And we're going to focus on kind of an overview of the action and expression portion of the guidelines of that principle, a little bit about the neuroscience and research. And then we're going to hear from teachers in the classroom. What are your tips, tricks, and resources from both Callie and Anne? They have they're a wealth of knowledge. So they're going to share so many fun, cool things they're doing. And then we'll end with a little bit of time for questions and a little reflection in closing. And so feel free to drop your questions in the chat, but when we get to the Q&A, we'll go back and try to grab those questions, but you'll be able to unmute and ask anything you'd like as well. We always like to start with a little inclusive welcome to get people engaged and talking and all that fun stuff. And today we're going to do a little Maycember survival. If you have not heard of Maycember, it is a affectionate nickname that teachers and others have given to the last few weeks of the school year in May, or just the whole month of May in general and honest. Um, and that name really comes from the fact that this time of year feels a little bit like December, really chaotic, lots of events, lots of sugar, and maybe even some costumes, some goodbyes, lots of paperwork, all the things. Um, and so, there's a lot being asked of teachers right now. You guys are doing it all and holding it all together. If you have your own kids, you're managing all of their school chaos as well. Um, so, I would love to hear how you're surviving Maysember. There's two options for this one. The first one is you can pick your Maysember persona. Are you the Zen master, keeping it all together somehow? Are you the dumpster fire? I'm proud of it. No shame, people, no shame. Are you the optimist that is fully powered by caffeine, maybe chocolate? I don't know. Are you the list maker that's like, I'm just holding on to the structure? And option two is if you want, you're welcome to show us your Maysember survival item. You can grab one and show it in the screen or drop it into the chat as well. So you can choose either one or both, but we'd love to hear how are you surviving Maysember? Oh, Lisa is a list maker. Melissa's got her caffeine and her lists. Love that. That is the way to do it. List maker. Rhonda as well. I would have to agree. I need a good list. It's true. The optimist who makes lists. Oh, Anne's all about the chai lattes and the naps. Love that. This is awesome. I love finding time for a nap. I love it. Mikey is also making lists and posting them everywhere and telling my husband to go find the lists instead of asking me, which has been very helpful. Zen and lists. Love it. Thank you guys so much. I love it. Well, feel free to keep those coming if you like, and we're gonna dive into our content. So within the UDL guidelines, right, we know there's these three strands within the guidelines. We've explored the engagement strand and the representation strand in other episodes within this series. They are recorded, they are on that home base document, and you are welcome to explore those and reach out with any questions you might have. But today we're really going to be exploring that action and expression strand of the guidelines. And like the other two strands, they are connected to an actual network in our brain. And so the action and expression strand is connected to that strategic network of the brain. And that strategic network really governs how we plan, how we organize, and how we express what we know. And we know the guidelines are pretty extensive. They're pretty bulky. We've got those three guidelines and all those considerations within there. But when we take all of those guidelines and break down, what does it mean to provide multiple means of action and expression? What is it that learners need in order to show their learning, in order to express what they know? It really boils down to these three primary things here. Really making sure that we're providing multiple ways for learners to show what they know. And this can be in the form of options, but it can also be in the form of providing a variety of ways that we're allowing students to show what they know throughout a unit or throughout a week or throughout a month or whatever the case, but having that variety of ways for our learners to show what they know. Providing a variety of learning tools, making sure that we're really allowing that support for expression and skill development by offering tools to go along with learning. And then finally, we know that providing that clear feedback and strong progress monitoring, providing that guidance on progress on next steps is really how our learners are going to be able to show what they know, right? Because it's really going back to that clear expectations, and we can't show what we know if we don't know what's expected of us as well. So this first portion, this first strategy, providing multiple ways for learners to show their understanding. This is such an important thing for our human brains because our brain does not have one single output channel, right? Speaking, writing, drawing, building, each one of these actually uses different neural pathways. And so when our students can only show what they know through one way, like a written test, we actually end up unintentionally testing that one single pathway rather than their actual content knowledge or what they understand. and offering a variety of ways to show what they know, whether that's through choice or variety, to write, speak, draw, demonstrate, is really letting our learners' brains use its strongest route to express that understanding. So again, if we provide that choice, it can really allow us to see what our students truly know, and it provides a better picture of what that knowledge actually is. And then when we're looking at what is this impact on our specific learners, of course, our English language learners, oftentimes having that English language or not quite yet having that English language to express their knowledge can be an enormous barrier in the classroom if we don't provide other ways for them to show their knowledge. And so if we can help remove that barrier and allow our students to express their learning in a variety of ways, we can really, really see what their actual content knowledge is. For our students with disabilities, again, we're helping to separate that content knowledge from a skill-based barrier. If our student is really struggling to form written full sentences for whatever reason that is, if we can remove that barrier of writing and allow them to express their knowledge in a different way, we're really going to see a lot more of what their true understanding is. And really, any learner, whether wherever they're at, as we're building our skills and as we're progressing, we're going to be able to do things in different ways and more of a variety of ways. And so if we provide an option for our learners, it can really encourage that processing and confidence while learning at each stage really develops. So we are going to hear from both Anne and Callie, and they're going to talk a little bit about ways that they provide multiple ways for their learners to show understanding. And we're going to start with Anne, and she's going to dive into some ways she does this with her students in her English class.
Well, hi, everybody. So as we were talking about just options and tools and feedback, one thing that I like to think about to help kind of lower the cognitive load for students so that they're free to have their minds focusing on the actual content building that we're doing is to have the same routines repeated over and over throughout the year, but varying the content. So I have two examples here on the screen. The first one is what I call cycle words. So we're doing language work and we're looking at word parts, and I give students lists and they teach the class. And this is actually a ton of fun. They have a variety of ways that they can teach the class. So there's choice, there's collaboration, and then there's this low stakes presentation, speaking in front of the class. And I usually always say that everyone in the group has to contribute in a meaningful way to the presentation, but I don't say everyone has to speak. So that means, they can be a person doing hand motions. They can be a person, holding up a card and pointing at things. They can write something on the board. So rather than saying in a presentation, everyone has to speak, I say everyone has to participate in a meaningful way. And you'll see that right there on the slide. And then we also go ahead and just talk about varying that content so that by we get to the end of the year, when I say we're doing this kind of work, they know exactly what's expected. So they can really focus on what are the words that we're learning right now, instead of having to focus on what is this routine. Same thing with vocabulary. We do vocab building for every single unit in English. And I think that the nice thing about vocabulary is you're always going to need words for analyzing things. And so in the English classroom, I anticipate not what are the words in the reading, but what are the words that they'll need to analyze the reading in their final product. So I look to choose high leverage words that will give them like specific and precise words that will help them to talk about the text in advanced ways. And then we pre-teach those. And I use vocabulary posters all the time. What I typically do with this is they have some time to create a poster. And then on another day, we'll do a gallery walk and they walk around and they have a place in their notebooks to just take notes on each of the words, but they're looking at, 16 to 32 different posters at a time as they're walking around. They just find, maybe there's 4 to 8 words. And as they walk around, they're looking at the way it's represented by multiple students in the classroom. So they're seeing it being taught by their peers maybe differently than I would teach it. So, and it's the same kind of basic 5 things: a word definition, a symbol, a connection to what we're doing, and then a hashtag. And the hashtags are my favorite because I can really check for understanding. If they understand the word's meaning, then they'll come up with hilarious hashtags, or very like just great hashtags that capture the meaning of the word. So that's a good time. The next thing I was talking about, so speaking of reusing the same protocol. So we just talked about routines, but protocols to me are slightly different. So here, these are different things that I do in class, again, that allow students to really collaborate with one another. So one of the ones that you could probably look up easily is called Numbered Heads Together, which is where there's a question and they all talk about it. And then I spin like a spinner on my board. And then the person who's in that seat position gets to write the answer and stand up. But the whole group is giving them what they need to say and coaching them on how to say it. It feels a little bit like energetic and competitive, and the students really grabbed onto this. A couple others that I do, either pass the highlighter or pass the pen. So one person in the group is in control of writing things down, and then they make sure that they take turns with who's writing. Or like a clipboard captain. So you have somebody at one station who's in charge of writing, another person who's reading, and other people who are doing the activity. And then you switch roles every time you rotate. So small group rotations with varying roles. If we repeat that over and over, it means that it helps the students to be able to have this great way of interacting with one another where everybody has a role. We do that over and over, but with different content again. Physical and digital sorting. This one is kind of fun. I think tactile movement for some students is really, really valuable. But then there's also the mess and the work that it takes to cut things out. So I've done both digital and physical sorts. And this is just another way to look at checking to see if students understand what's going on without having, in this case, to produce as much. It's more of like either you get it or you don't. And so I have like if I color code, then I can see exactly what the color pattern should be. And it's a quick scan. And I could say, okay, you have 3 things that aren't in the right place, and then keep going. So I really enjoy sorting as a strategy in class. And then I wanted to quickly just talk about, this was one of my favorite activities that we did this year. So if you teach English or history or any sort of debate, have any sort of debate in your classroom, what I liked about the way I organized this year was that we had, of course, I talked about already having like taught explicitly vocabulary. And this is a lot of vocab actually that we have here, but that wasn't taught all at once. So we were building throughout our unit, and we're getting towards the end. And so now we have a big word bank for students to draw on. And then kind of explicitly teaching them the skills that I want them to use in their final writing. So the debate is setting them up for the final writing piece. So you were talking, Emily, about how when we are going to be asking students to produce something, sometimes writing is a barrier, but in the English class, writing is part of the standards. So we actually have to get them to write, and they're going to be tested on writing. So how do I use my other activities to show them exactly the skills that they're going to need to use in their essays, but practicing them in a fun, collaborative, and a little bit more low stakes way to prepare them. So what I did for our classroom debates is, rather than saying, okay, you get points for making this, the best point, or there's going to be a clear winner based on, the strongest arguments, I shifted giving points to specific skills I wanted them to use. So using specific, I called it a bridge transition, correctly using our vocabulary words, using quotes from the text to support your point. These were things that I really, really wanted to have students do in their final essays. So this was oral practice. And the great thing was I had flaggers in the classroom. So when students did these skills, they could just hold up a card and say, I heard it. And this was a great one for some of my students who are multilingual learners, where they can really just be listening for something very specific. Did I hear of that vocabulary word? And when they did, they could raise the card, and then somebody else would even be helping them, like, oh, they just said this, raise your card. And so it's a great way to reinforce that being able to listen to for those auditory cues in the classroom. So I think that this was, for me, was just a highly successful strategy in terms of getting them ready with the skills that they need to show on their summative assessments and their essays. Okay, and then finally, I guess whenever I give kind of choice boards or options, I used to say, oh, everybody has to do a one pager. And then I realized that not everybody likes to draw, including myself. And so I've also gone to giving like, say, you could do this on Canva or on paper, but I also thought, some students just really like to analyze and to write things. So just we were finished part 1 of Fahrenheit 451. So I give them 2 options. In other projects, or units, sometimes it's 4 or 5 different ways to show but just thinking about who are my students and what are their strengths and what might they enjoy in terms of being able to produce some sort of capstone project, and always with that lens of how is this going to prepare them for the writing that they're going to have to do. So that's kind of, I think that was my last one on this section, but the main thing here was just a variety, but repetition also can be really, really powerful in the classroom.
And just all the collaboration in there too, and that collective learning piece, and allowing them to use their voice, especially before they're practicing writing. So many cool things here. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to pass it on to Callie, and she's going to talk a little bit about how she provides those multiple ways for her learners to show what they know within the context of middle school math.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I'll start by saying is with every unit, we do have to provide that very traditional, typical math assessment that we all know and love, right? But oftentimes that does not give us the whole picture of what a student understands. Clearly for some students, they are very good at that. Like they have those test taking skills and they understand how to respond. And then others, they don't. Like I've been able to see that they understood lessons and that they were able to really engage with the content, but just the test itself is not demonstrating what they can do. And so in recent years, I've really tried to tap in to something that I struggled with a lot, and that is that creative side, right? A lot of times when we say we're a math person, we're very analytical, very linear. And sometimes we think that that doesn't necessarily talk to that creative side. And I struggled with that, but I've really enjoyed some of the more creative ways to bring in some different art and things like that into math. And so these are 2 examples of just some of the geometry units we start with in 8th grade. Students learn about rigid transformations and understanding that images can move around on a coordinate plane without changing size and without changing shape. And so the example on the left is students, they can choose from, they can take their own initials, right? So just kind of bringing in a personal connection. Sometimes they do initials, sometimes they'll choose like a logo that they wanted to do. And they're just showing a demonstration of these different types of transformations. And then sometimes they'll draw on the image itself or on the back. And what they do is they explain to me, okay, so if I'm starting in quadrant 1 and I'm moving from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, this was the type of transformation I did. And so it's just kind of fun, and it allows them to just have the choice of what motions do you want to show and how do you want to explain it? How do you want to display it? And then on the right there with dilations, it's so fun to give them these cool little pictures that they get really creative with just honestly the way that they color it. And so that part, it's not even about the math, but it's just, I'm going to engage with a topic that maybe I'm not as comfortable with. And so I love that the kids, they'll take these images, these silly kind of almost cartoonish images of dinosaurs, and we've done bats and all different kinds of animals and different shapes. And again, it gives them a chance to engage and get excited about a math topic that if I just said, okay, let's take out our practice books or just show me how you can do this on a test, they kind of don't want to always engage as much. And so these projects, I really find that the students, they're just more willing to work with me and to really show what they've learned throughout a unit. And then on the next slide, just some more examples of different ways that we've brought art into the math classroom. So students, even though we do so much digital work, I still want them to understand how to use physical tools. And so we do a lot of work with angles all throughout 7th and 8th grade mathematics. And so we do a little project where it's just, do you understand how to use a protractor? And so what I love about this is that the designs they create are theirs alone. They are random. I kind of model for them, hey, we're just going to randomly place some lines on a piece of paper. And so they are absolutely just with a ruler, randomly drawing these angles and triangles and all different shapes. And then what they're doing is they're using their protractor to measure and classify. And that's where the color comes from, is that they get to create a key. And so sometimes that key is just, hey, this example has like from 0 to 30 degrees, I colored it one way, or another interval of angles. Also, sometimes we're just like, okay, let's practice some vocabulary. Are these acute angles? Are they obtuse? We can go even further as to coloring vertical angles and supplementary angles. And so the kids come up with a key, and then they color it and they design it in ways that are just really intriguing to the eye. I always find these so fascinating because they interpret the color and the way that they want to express that very differently. But it's fun to get them using that tool and understanding how a protractor works. And then the other one we do, the stained glass graphing. This is a fun project because what I love about it is we're graphing lines, but the image itself allows students and allows myself very quickly to understand if they were able to accurately graph lines. There's a lot of symmetry in these graphs, maybe not so much in the coloring that they're doing, but the symmetry in the lines. And we're looking at the same line from a positive slope perspective and a negative slope perspective. And so just about every line on that graph has a positive and negative. And then we're also kind of comparing the steepness of the lines. As well as within there, there's a lot of horizontal and vertical lines. And so the behind the scenes work is looking at the equations that go with these lines. And so again, it's just fun, it's creative, it's colorful, and it's just bringing math into a whole new light that maybe a lot of kids have not seen before. So those are some really fun, colorful projects. I'm not sure if there's another slide with more examples. Oh yeah, okay.
I also realized that my prompt example and the picture didn't match, but they did take place on the same day. I just put the wrong prompt on, so sorry about that.
That's okay. I remember the prompt for this one.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, okay. So there was two different, we could talk about both of them. So we were looking at Pythagorean theorem, and students at this point, they understood the theorem and they had done lots of practice with just, here's a triangle, solve for a missing side. But we were transitioning into how do I apply the theorem? And specifically, how do I know which side I'm solving for, right? So if you're not familiar with Pythagorean theorem, we have two legs of the right triangle that make the right angle. And then the side opposite the right angle is a hypotenuse. And so based on that, you have to be very specific about which value you are using for each of those variables. And the hardest part that students really have is, well, is this a leg or is it the hypotenuse? And so as we look at the word problems, like the prompts, we had a plane that was, you could see it, like try to visualize this. A plane is 5 miles directly above a house, 42 miles from a runway at the nearest airport, and just draw the picture. What do you think is happening right now? And then from there, we would look at the pictures and then they would try to solve, and does that answer make sense? Now, the picture that we have presented here, it was a different problem where it talked about how a boat had this 200-foot anchor, and it was on a lake that was 75 feet deep. And they're going to drop their anchor, and throughout the day, they were just going to drift. They were going to enjoy the sunshine. They're going to put on some music. Right? And so just asking them, what is the furthest distance that the boat could potentially drift throughout the day, given the constraints that they had? And so we use our desks as just a writing surface. We have lots of expo markers around. And so it was just this day of connecting my math reasoning to a picture so that I understood, am I solving for the correct variable or not? And so I really love doing any type of word problem like this. I always tell students that drawing pictures is one of the most underutilized strategies in math. that I constantly want them to say, like, if you see a word problem, draw it. What do you see happening? Don't worry about the math yet. Let's just try to make a connection to the question and what's being asked, and then we'll get into the math. And so that a lot of times allows a much easier entry point for many students who might get that kind of frozen, I don't know, it's a word problem, I don't know what to do. Well, we all can maybe draw a picture, and I even show them. I mean, my pictures, my stick figures are not the greatest. And so I really like to capitalize too on a lot of these artists, but showing all the different variations of how they thought about the problem. And just that connection between the drawing and the word problem itself has really allowed them to feel a lot less afraid of the word problems. And then these were some other examples. I do try to get my students up and active. Oftentimes in the classroom, we do a lot of building thinking classrooms. And if you're not familiar with that, that's working up at the vertical whiteboard space and doing lots of different problems. But I also like to get them up and outside if I can. We use a lot of sidewalk chalk to draw pictures and angles. And recently, just a few weeks ago, we were ordering rational numbers. And I said, okay, let's make a human number line. And so students were put into groups and they were just handed a random card. And I truly, at this point, there was no instruction. They knew a little bit about rational and irrational numbers. And I said, work together and put yourselves in order from least to greatest. And then convince me that it was correct. And so once they were correct, or once they thought they were correct, they got into these lines. I took a picture and then we analyzed it outside, but then also in the classroom, and they had to justify their order to all of the other groups in class. And so it was really fun just to get them outside on a beautiful day. And then the other two examples here are specifically with a lot of our math in 8th grade is this linear relationship, y equals mx plus b. And to me, the way that I connected with that as a math student myself was that that is telling us a story. And so we do a lot of storytelling with this equation. And so as we're learning all of these technical components, it's connected back to a story, connected back to a story. What, do you remember when we were talking about the flagpole and the flags were going up and the rate that it was going up? That was our slope. And we have all these different kind of anchor problems that we use in our curriculum and go back to the story and make a connection. And so at the end of this unit, they got to create their own story. And they had multiple options for how they wanted to do that. They could make a children's book, which is what we see here. This is a student who, she's an amazing artist, and she was making a story about how, you know, slope is the percent of the painting that was completed per minute. And she literally drew each little section throughout her whole book. It was just so beautifully done. The way that her art really talked about the story of the slope and the y-intercept and how the x and the y were showing a relationship. Other students did that project. They did a podcast. I had some girls do a whole podcast about renting an Airbnb in Lake Tahoe. It was amazing to hear the connections that they made with, you know, well, if we're just going to stay for the one night, we have to put down a deposit. And they knew that that was that y-intercept, the initial fee, and then the cost per night was their slope. And they added a lot of great humor. They even put like a little advertisement into the podcast. So a lot of fun with the storytelling. And then the last example, the scatter plot data report. This is kind of a continuation where y equals mx plus b, it's very specific data, whereas scatter plots, it's a lot of just, we gather data. And so this was them getting to experience using some online graphing tools. We use Desmos online graphing calculator. And so here is a piece that I like, that if a student is still struggling, I don't understand how to write the equation of this line. The graphing calculator actually provides the equation to them. And so the component here that I was looking at was, can you interpret the information? So maybe we're still struggling just a little bit with creating that equation, but can you interpret it, and can you talk about it? Can you talk about maybe some potential problems? Because we were thinking about just big picture in our world, this data, it was all varied, and are the trends going to stay the same? Are they going to change? Maybe what would be a potential problem with this data if we continued to collect more and more? So just a variety of examples of different ways to try and get kids active, creative, and tapping into some of those skills and assets that they have that we don't always think about when we think about math.
And I think you also just make it so much more applicable to real life. And I think that's a piece that I know many of us growing up, math was not connected to our real life, and it didn't quite make sense because it didn't connect to real life, and it was just like memorizing equations. But this storytelling piece and connecting it to the real world, and so many layers of such a great way to provide math instruction.
Yeah, one of the things I'll add on is that I forgot to mention most of these, like when we say that unit, you have a unit and you have that typical traditional test, but then the project idea absolutely comes from how is this relevant, right? Because the kids always with math, well, so what? Why do I need this? Why do I need this? Computers can do everything for me. And so that is the piece where a lot of these projects, they come from how is that connected to real life? How is it going to be relevant for them? And that's kind of where the inspiration comes for some of these.
That's awesome. So the next thing we're going to talk about is just that importance of really making sure we're providing a variety of learning tools for our students as well. And the why behind that is really that when we provide these tools for students, we can kind of help remove some of that cognitive load of trying to figure out all the components of how to do a task by providing a tool to kind of really make that just a little bit more simple, right? Tools like things like text to speech, speech to text, graphic organizers, calculators, all of these things, they help lift that cognitive load so that students can really dive into learning a specific concept or a strategy, whatever the content is, right? And of course, for our specific learners, all of those multilingual tools are for our English language learners are going to help reduce those language barriers, help support that independent communication. Things like sentence frames and visuals and translation tools, etc., is just going to allow them to have more access to the content and what's happening. Again, students with learning disabilities, any one of our learners that's still building that understanding as well. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I'm trying to make sure that our presenters get through everything. So I'm going to pass it off to Anne, and she's going to share a little bit about some tools that she utilizes in English class. She has them all linked here for you to share, but I will move the slides along because we have images of each of these tools as well.
So I decided to approach this from the two main things that present barriers in my classroom, and that is grade level reading texts and a difficult long writing prompts for essays. So when we're talking about this, I think of it, I remember hearing the term differentiation forever, and I really like how UDL talks about universal access and universally supplying tools to all of our learners. So I kind of think of it as, instead of like different tools for different students, I think of it as layers. So my first layer really is everyone has access to all these rich tools to help them access the learning. And then layered on top of that, I have to think of my specific learners and what barriers they might face with this particular thing. And I call those like targeted lifelines. So there's a whole bunch of things that I give universally. And once so many students have all of these tools, that frees me up to focus on the students who need that extra layer of support, and gives me time to conference with them or check in with them one-on-one, since almost everybody in the class has what they need already. So when I'm thinking about a reading task, I obviously use as many access tools as I have, like a whole class audio reading or any other way to get that the voice to them, because I know that when we're hearing a text read aloud, like our comprehension can be like 200 to 300 lexiles higher than if it's just written on the page and we're reading it in our heads. So hearing the voice, hearing the pacing, hearing the inflection and tone of voice, all of those things can be really powerful in the classroom when we're talking about reading. I also I talked about kind of preloading vocabulary and what that would look like. And then the second layer has to do with things that can still be offered to everybody. I like to place them in the center of the table. They're kind of like visual anchors, but any kind of picture with short summaries to help our students access a higher level text stories and things. And then for my English learners, a multilingual dictionary. So there are things when we're getting to reading something like Night, and going in and saying, what are the kind of the key moments in this narrative and what kind of pictures can I use to support that, so that every student, even though we're reading this big chunk of text, and every student can follow along with using the visuals, using the summaries, using the glossaries. So these are just a couple of the tools that I used. We discovered when we were doing vocabulary for our Holocaust unit that students need to actually do more than just the vocab posters this time, because there were some subtle nuances in the strategies that we were analyzing. So this gave students the opportunity to practice, to look more deeply at words, and then to do some activities that go with it. And I have this linked if you wanted to take a closer look. And then I talked a little bit about the visual summaries. So I love that we have AI that can help us with this now, because I could put in some specific prompts and come up with an image that really would closely be tied to the summary that we were working with. So I could project something like this or just have it on the desks where the students are. And so that as we're reading, they can still follow along and hopefully imagine what's happening. If I column them, they can share out an idea based on the picture, not just the listening to the and reading along with the larger text. And then, of course, I have students this year that speak at least 4 different languages in my classes. So I like to build just a multilingual dictionary. I love that, again, I can use any kind of AI tool to help me generate this. These kind of things used to take a lot longer to make. So I'm really grateful for that. Now let's talk about writing now. So writing, like I said, it's probably students coming into my English class, this is where they have the most fear, and they need the most support. And so there's several things that I'd like to provide to every single student. And they don't all use them. I kind of say, if you don't need the tool, then don't take it, but I have them available. I like to kind of fade how I use them throughout the year. Like at the beginning of the year, I might give every student a graphic organizer and require it. And then by the end of the year, it's kind of like you get what you need in order to be successful. So that first layer is usually something like, and I don't have this one on there, but an exemplar. So like, here's an example essay on a slightly different topic, but similar ideas, and organized in the way I want you to organize it. A graphic organizer that kind of lays out how they should be completing the task. Checklists, which are great, so that when they're going through, even with a graphic organizer, they might not get all the pieces. So I really like checklists, and so do my students. And checklists are great also for peer feedback. So you can give your checklist to a peer and they can check through it and they know exactly what they're looking for. And then I have what I call level up or challenge menus. And this is offered to all students. So I've heard, people talk about extensions for advanced learners, but what I found this year is that when I offer the challenges to every single student, students will surprise you with the challenges that they want to take on, and they end up doing really great things. Some of my students who struggle a lot might glob onto one of the things from the challenge menu. And I'm like, whoa, that's really high level, because they were presented with the opportunity to experiment with some of the more challenging things. And then, of course, the vocabulary and things that we already talked about. Because almost every student in my class is going to have access to layer 1. Well, every student does, it's universal. And I have a lot of these, I have them digital, and then I also have them printed out. I usually have them on colored paper, and I reuse them in every class. So they don't have these, they don't take them out of the classroom. And so I can say, look at the green paper, look at the blue paper. And that just makes it easier to kind of organize which tool or resource that I'm pointing them to, instead of constantly saying, well, find the one that says this at the top. So color coding for just about anything that you do is helpful for organization. But then when I'm thinking about layer 2, these are where students who really need that substantial support, or even moderate support. Sometimes I'll do a couple different levels here. And this is particularly with sentence frames and individual check-ins. So having a space at my desk, I switched from having a traditional desk to having more of a table, because a desk has like barriers for students to be able to pull their chairs up and actually sit in conference with you. So having a table means that you can have like several students gather around you. So I still have a traditional desk, but I don't sit at it anymore. They can pull a chair over and students will just come up and plop down next to me and show me their essay. And what's great about this is when I have pre-planned sentence starters and frames for students who need that moderate or substantial support, it becomes, and then there's might be word banks on there or other tools. It becomes almost like a plug and play, like, okay, here's our bank of strategies. Which one do you want to focus on? Okay, that goes right here. And I've seen my students get better and better at advocating for themselves, at realizing that they can use the tools, at coming to me rather than me calling them to my desk to work with them. And having layer one in place frees me up to do those individual check-ins. And the students who really need them are the ones who come back and talk to me. And the other students have realized that actually I can do this on my own. I'm going to let Ms. Grant talk to those students who really, really need it. And that's been really powerful throughout the year too. So some of my students who are a little bit more just anxious learners, but they can do it. They've learned that generally I'll say, okay, look at this resource. Okay, go back to your seat, rather than spending a lot of time conferencing with them individually if they don't need it. So having those kind of pre-planned things, even for a student who's probably doing an awesome job, I say, okay, go just compare it with the exemplar and see what you see, instead of taking the time to read through and give them all that feedback in the moment. So kind of prioritizing the students, honestly, who need more substantial support, but still having lots of things in place for students who just need that little bit of assurance that they're on the right track.
Awesome. And then these are just images of those things that are linked there, like that, a universal graphic organizer, universal checklist, this challenge menu, leveling up your writing, love that. The sentence frames, things like that. Thank you so much, Anne.
And for the sentence frames, I have different levels of sentence frames. So I have the full essay sentence frame, and then the one here is more for, it makes it shorter. So it's still the same standard and content, but it needs just one piece of evidence rather than two per body paragraph, for example. And then when I'm going to like a level 1 English learner or a student who really needs intensive support, we might narrow it down to just 1 or 2 paragraphs, still practicing the same skills.
Awesome. All right, now Callie's going to share a little bit about some tools she's got in her classroom.
Yeah. So we actually, with our math standards, we have math practices, and one of our practices focuses on actually being able to use tools strategically. And so knowing when is the right time to use a tool and how do I use it appropriately. And so here you'll see there's a variety of tools that we use where we've already talked about, like dry erase on the desks and the whiteboards, and using graph paper is definitely helpful. But then even using those online graphing calculators where if I haven't been able to master some of the skills, I at least can analyze that I see this equation and now I can analyze it. But one of the areas that students struggle with the most is when we do geometry. Geometry is a very visual type of study. And so it's really hard sometimes when we talk about these transformations that we want to do. And we say, okay, if you're going to reflect or if you're going to rotate. And so we could look at numbers all day long. And for some students that helps, but others, it's just, I visually do not understand what you're talking about, right? And so we use a lot of tools for that. And that is where we use transparency paper or like tracing paper. But one of my favorite tools is actually something that a colleague of mine created a number of years ago, and that was a rotational wheel. And so I think the video that Emily has here, this just is a demonstration where when a student is trying to understand how a rotation works on the coordinate plane, this is made out of paper plates and some brads, but it allows them to understand how a coordinate is changing as we're rotating it on the coordinate plane. So I'm going to play that. They're understanding that X and Y values of a point are moving. And that is such the favorite go-to tool in that unit. And anytime we review throughout the year, they love being able to see that, because it's that moment in math where they go, that's what it's doing. Okay, now I get what you're talking about. And so we have that. And then, like I said, these other tools used for geometry and even for our algebra units as well. But they're really fun when the students can visualize what's happening.
And I love your tool setup. There's so much agency. It's just there. Go grab it if you need it.
Yeah, this is just kind of the corner of the room that they are available to anyone at all times. Any math tool that they want to use. And then at the top there too is kind of my own quick change version of extensions. And that's just if you want a little challenge packet, those are also available. And they change just regularly throughout the units. But just having those accessible to any student at any given time. And they know where to go and how to use them. So.
Awesome. And then finally, that brings us to that cleared feedback and progress monitoring. And of course, this is just something that as learners, our brain needs to have feedback to know what's next, what's going well, what's not going well, but that really clear feedback. And then also that progress monitoring to know where are we coming from, and building in that celebration and success. And I'm trying not to rush, but also trying to make sure we get everything in for our timing. So I'm going to pass it to Anne to talk about kind of how she provides that assessment and feedback piece.
Yeah. So this year I've been mentoring somebody who's going through the induction program. She's a second-year teacher, and our conversations, I kind of realized that beginning teachers sometimes don't have as much familiarity with this, just the flow of how to plan and where to put your assessments, and which kind of assessments to do when. So this is probably basic for a lot of people, but still, I'll just talk about it quickly. So we think about what the end is. We begin with the end in mind. We have kind of a vision, and we start planning. What's that final thing going to look like? Where do I need to get to by the end? And then I think of kind of my capstone project, I call them. So these are the things that are going to practice all the skills that they need in their final assessment, but do it in a fun, supportive way, with built-in checkpoints. And then from there, I also want to have some individual formative assessments that help me make sure that the specific skills they'll need on that summative that they can do individually, not just in their groups. So I make sure I build those in. And then of course, there's the daily practice and check-ins. And so now I've begun to build an entire unit. And within all of that, I think some of the best ways to do daily check-ins and other than these formal assessments are things like using a random name generator to make sure everyone speaks. Sometimes if a student doesn't have an answer, we can say to them, hey, that's okay, but I'm coming back to you, so you can repeat or add on to what somebody else said, but I'll be right back. And I call on a couple people and then I circle back. And at that point, they can say exactly what somebody else said, but they said, it's just what he said. I said, okay, but you're going to say it in a different way. So just share. And I think that's important. And then I have a couple of links on this slide to some ideas to support interactions, both from the teacher standpoint, that's the Baker's Dozen, and then from the student standpoint, that's the collaboration toolkit. How do we help students learn how to collaborate in meaningful ways and explicitly teach them how to do that? And as we do that, that helps us to like listen in on those conversations and give feedback and understand like what do they know? We got to get them talking, get them producing something so that we can measure that. And then I guess this, I just kind of talked about how the capstone project leads directly into kind of our summative, but I just gave some examples here if you wanted to look at how I set up my units. These are kind of live links to see exactly what we're doing and how we're building our units. If you're an English teacher and you just wanted to see something like that, particularly if you use the Amplify curriculum, feel free to reach out to me and I can help you with those kind of things. And then the last one I had on here is just the value of self-reflection and self-grading. So I always struggle with things like group projects or live presentations. It can be difficult to grade them in the moment. because I just get kind of caught up in the moment and I'm watching them like, this is fun. And like, everybody gets an A, you know? So how do I grade fairly? And I find that the self-reflection can really, really help me to do that. They have to justify using the rubric and the language of the rubric, what grade they think they earned. And then there's some other questions that I add in there to help them think about the process of learning as well as the presentation of learning. And I find that they're pretty accurate, honestly, in their reflection. There's always the occasional high achiever who gives themselves a B or a C when they really should earn an A. And then there's sometimes there's a student who achieved lower on that particular thing that says, I give myself an A because I want an A, you know, and you're like, okay, you didn't justify it. So I don't think so. But overall, students really do take to this, and it helps me. And it also kind of takes away the argument about what the grade is, because essentially they earn what they tell me they think they earn. And I think that's a really powerful strategy.
Love it. Thank you, Anne. Callie's going to share a little bit about how she provides feedback with math.
Well, this first slide, it really just talks about, I truly, truly believe in the importance of the digital tools that we have available. When it comes down to it, math is an accuracy-based subject. And so I want to make sure that students get immediate feedback. And it's just simply not feasible for me to be able to check every problem every day. And so these are two tools that I use often, Delta Math and Khan Academy. Khan Academy is free to anyone and everyone. Delta Math does require a subscription. They have multiple levels, but it provides students such clear feedback. They get feedback on their own work, whether it was correct or not. Both of these platforms have examples provided to students. They have videos that walk students through. And so I just think that they help so much for me to be able to just know and provide students feedback, and myself, I can look at reports just to see how they are progressing with skills. But for some of our other projects on the next slide, one of the things that I really wanted to work on this year was on these projects, how do I chunk it, right? These students, you give them this big project, maybe the storytelling project or these other scatter plot things. And so what I tried this year was something a little different where rather than just giving them a rubric, I created what I was calling a planning document. And so whether it was going to be a paper project or it was a digital creation, they had to do all of their planning on paper first. And this was, as it says here, to help alleviate issues with AI. I didn't want a student just to go to AI and say, hey, oh, I did this great project at home in 10 minutes. And so what we did was we put the rubric into this planning document, and there's spacing so that they can actually see the rubric. This is the expectation. And now here are notes. Here is space for my evidence. And so once I saw that final product, I had both. I had the planning document and the final product to see the growth of the student from when they planned it to when they executed it. But also maybe a student struggled with, oh, how do I show my evidence mathematically online? I don't know how to digitally show all these steps. And so I kind of look at both of them as I'm assessing a larger project. And I think it helped just set such clear expectation so that they knew exactly, oh, this is what I need for proficient. So I'm going to have those notes right here. And then the last piece I was talking about with feedback is something that we're just starting to play with. We, in my math department, we really want to work on progress towards mastery. And sometimes that is an ongoing process that takes an entire semester to get to. And so we're starting to play with this idea of doing some essential standard checks using all different types of things. It could be an online resource, a paper resource, it could be a project. And so just having them track throughout a semester, where are you today? Right? That on this particular assessment, I maybe was scoring an emerging. And we did kind of give it a numerical value so that it would match like our A, B, C grades. And so they would just put a date there that, okay, as of today, this date, I'm an emerging, and then maybe some comments. And then the next time, right, because our goal is always proficiency. So if you aren't proficient yet, you'll get another chance, another opportunity to assess on that. And then once they hit proficient, if they choose to move on and they still want to practice more to mastery, they can. or as I said, proficiency is the goal. And so just something to play with, to do some self-monitoring and self-tracking of how they're progressing with our essential standards throughout the year.
I love it. Thank you guys so much. I told you guys they're a wealth of knowledge and they're full of so much knowledge that I'm so sorry based on time. We don't have a lot of time for questions. But if you do drop them in the chat, I promise we will answer them on the home base document and make sure we get back to you. We appreciate you guys being here so much. I do want to plug all of our UDL Unlocked episodes are listed here, and they've got the content listed, they're linked, and they have which teachers were on there. Both Anne and Callie have been guests this year. Both their episodes are fantastic. You can hear more information from them there. And also want to plug really quickly, our registration for the 26-27 Inclusive Learning Circle series is up and ready. So please feel free to follow that link. As always, we are available on social media and you can follow us and get all kinds of tips and tricks. Mimi is dropping the feedback survey into the chat. We appreciate you guys being here so much. If you do have questions, feel free to stay. We're happy to answer them, but we so appreciate you being here. Anne and Callie, you guys are amazing. Another plug that their school site is officially a showcase site starting in the fall. And if you want to see them in action, their classrooms are joyful and exciting and collaborative. And there's just so much great fun learning happening there. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for being here. Oh, great question. Registration in the chat. Good idea. Mimi, would you mind dropping that?
I'll drop that in.
Thanks, Rhonda. Absolutely.